Hi everyone, this is Cyron from Hong Kong, and I'm the Executive Director of MakerBay Foundation. And thanks to everyone joining these sessions. And as you see in the video, it is what is happening in MakerBay. And we are a non-profit organization in Hong Kong, and we have a makerspace to let everyone come to make their solution happen, and they learn different skill sets like the woodwork, metalwork, laser cut 3D printing, something like that. And the main thing is they can become a maker in here and make something happen. So this is really great that today we have two speakers to join these sessions. We have Tara and also Samira to share their experience on how they inspire the young people to learn AI and using AI to make a social impact. I think it is really, really interesting topic because for MakerBay, we have AI program to train the young people and collaborate with Technovation. And at the same time, AI is really trendy works. Many people thought about it. Many people say they can use AI in different kind of solutions. So I think it is really, really important for the young people to know what is AI and how they can really implement it, or it is really only for the really tech background student. I think we can discuss more later on. So we'll have individual sharing first, and then we will go to panel discussions. And then after all the sessions, you guys can stay and networking with each other because we have a social launch function in this platform. So so if you guys have any questions, if anything what you want to ask, just feel free to put in chat, and we have a Q&A box. So we will try to answer all the questions, and yeah, let's feel free to chat with us. So so let me pass my time to Tara first, so you can share a little bit about yourself and your experience on like inspiring the young people.
Yeah, thank you. And it's awesome to be part of this event. We have worked with MakerBay for many years, and it's been really cool to see the kinds of problems the MakerBay community tackles and the kinds of innovations you come up with. So I will share our story, and I have a couple of slides that we can go through. So I started Technovation. It is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to inspire young people, especially girls, to tackle problems in their communities using the most powerful technologies we have. So 10 years ago, it was mobile. Now it's AI, and maybe it'll be quantum computing, but it's really about the sense of possibility. And I wanted to share some of the lessons we have learned about what actually works to change a young person's attitudes, skills, beliefs for the long term, because there are so many programs that teach you how to code, so many courses you can go to learn about machine learning online, and the evidence to show that it is working is not there. And so when you're thinking about what is the best thing for me to learn, or what is the best thing for me to teach, here are some of the mistakes and things that we have seen in our own experience that may be able to help you. So I'll start off by sharing a little bit about the state of AI education. As I said, there's a lot of content out there. UNESCO released a report earlier this year that reviews 16 government-endorsed AI curriculum. So for instance, if a government of a country says we're going to implement AI in the school systems, these are the countries that have done so. And if you UNESCO analyzed them and found that roughly these curricula are pretty long, ranging between 40 to 100 hours in length, because of course this is a pretty technical field. And most of the curricula actually spend their time on AI literacy. So there's quite a bit more discussion around ethics, social impact. But if you were to look at it, we know good teaching practices, good learning practices are when children or young people or any kind of learner is is building something, is applying their knowledge. And that is something that is not seen in these curricula, where it is not student-centered, it is not helping young people apply this learning. And so we did our own analysis looking at, because we've been part of this field for a while, looking at different out-of-school curricula or platforms, how long they've been running, and whether they have any evidence to show that it is their programs or their approach is making a difference. And so you can see Machine Learning for Kids, some of you may know it. It's a really, really awesome platform that runs on IBM Watson. It's been running for 5 years. It has some lesson plans, and it's really cool. AI Singapore is another public literacy platform initiative, reached a lot of people, and there's some data around interest, and but not enough around to say that this method of curricula is going to make this kind of impact. Technovation has been running the AI education program for 5 years, and we actually have published a research paper on how what the model of curriculum actually makes the most difference. And I'll share some of those findings now. So UNESCO's recommendation after that analysis was that, firstly, there's not enough evidence to show that these AI curricula are working. But secondly, we really need to make it project-based, and it has to be fun, because otherwise nobody's going to stick through an online course. Most of us register, but we don't finish. And that's the core of what Technovation does. So it's a 12-week program where girls partner with mentors on an online platform, or you can meet in person, and you pick a problem in your community that you care about and that aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals. And you actually learn to build an AI prototype. And it is so much beyond learning how to code. So you can look at the fundamental, like the foundation, of course, is technical. But if you think about any kind of entrepreneur, there's so much more than just the technical product. You have to understand what is the problem. You have to understand what are the human behavioral barriers. And of course, you have to be resilient enough to keep iterating, because it's never going to work the first time. And then as you keep making your product better, you'll understand, okay, working in a team is not easy. You have to understand the ethics of what you're building. And as you go through this journey, you realize that you learn so much about yourself. You realize, like, what is hard? When do you want to give up? When do you get depressed? When do you want success, right? And how frequently do you want to know or have feedback that you're on the right track? And lastly, after you start doing this a couple of times, you actually start to get a better understanding of how complex these real world social problems are. And only after a significant amount of time are you able to actually come up with some creative ideas. And so that's what the Technovation curriculum is, which is really about starting with find a problem in your community, and then here are all the AI tools and models that you can use to actually develop a prototype that tackles the problem. And the really unique part about the curriculum is that it's not just teaching you about the technology development, but it's all of these skills of problem solving, self-management, working with people that are the top skills of the future, right? Like, this is what the World Economic Forum talks about. Most industry partners talk about that. It's not just about learning how to code. So we've reached roughly about 1/3 participants all around the world. And here are some of the examples of the problems that girls and young people are creating. There's lots of, like, using image recognition to help people with different types of abilities communicate better, using AI prediction models to predict different types of traffic patterns to protect pedestrians, again, using language recognition models to understand fake news, which is a big and increasing problem. And what we have found was that most of the students, when they go through our program, 91% increase their sense of self-efficacy after they go through Technovation. And more importantly, parents also begin to understand how these technologies work and why it's so important to support their children. And the really important part about the Technovation model is it's not an hour of code. It is 12 weeks, roughly like 50 to 60 hours of learning. But the impact on the student is very long and very deep. And so we followed up with our alumni after 10 years and found 76% of them are pursuing STEM degrees. They're working in STEM careers, and they credit Technovation for it because it was the first time somebody asked them what they thought about a problem. It was the first time they launched a real product onto the market and got people to use it. And it was the first time they got up on stage and presented their idea, pitched to a panel of judges, and the community applauded them. And so those types of experiences are unforgettable. And I think that kind of interaction and support is needed if you really want to engage a large number of people and young people and help them build their resources, their agency, their sense of possibility, voice, and increase their achievements. And this is really, really true of women all over the world, but also of minority communities. Every country has minority communities, and with the kinds of problems that we are seeing, we need everybody's voice and perspective if we want to innovate. So that's some of what we have learned, and I will pass it back to Cyrus.
Thanks, Sarah. I think it's really informative sharing, and I think we can discuss more later. And then, so let me introduce Samira to share about your background and your stories first.
Yeah, sure. So I have a tech for social impact background, coming from first Salesforce, where I was focused on the positive and negative impacts of technology and what Salesforce can really do to deepen its impact in society. And a piece of that, of course, is thinking about AI as well. I also, after that, have worked at Microsoft on the AI and sustainability market development team, which is really about building an ecosystem around sustainability and around AI in the interest of social good. And that involves, partnerships with social entrepreneurs, as well as, again, thinking about a holistic way that a corporation can bring all of its assets to the table to really support AI. And one lens would be education and education around AI, especially, pertaining to youth. So, taking a step back and looking at the experience I had at Salesforce and Microsoft and the various programs I was exposed to, as well as the direction that the world is moving, I think, we really need to take a step back and think about what is the purpose of AI. So just like other technological innovations, the purpose of AI is really to, support our well-being today, as well as to advance in society or humanity in a particular way. So if we think about AI as being a tool that we're using to support our well-being today, support flourishing going forward, then it really needs to be bound by an ecosystem that is informed by, what are the actual consequences of AI, and it presents an opportunity to really build from the ground up a new way of really, a new way or a new world order, because you have this powerful tool that is integrated into every aspect of your life. So keeping that in mind, and keeping in mind that AI is an opportunity to really build something net new, what I was working on at Salesforce was really trying to think about ecosystems. And so how do you build an ecosystem level approach to AI? So it's not just about the solution that has, let's say, a positive good. It's not just about the guardrails to make sure that whatever solution you're creating doesn't have negative impact on society. It's also about some of these other things, like how do you create greater education and awareness around the usage of AI, the impacts of AI in different sort of scenarios with respect to particular cause areas or sustainable development goals. There needs to be an ethical framework that is applied to AI innovation and that framework needs to be socialized. So people need to be educated in AI from a sort of impact perspective, from a historical perspective, even from a philosophical perspective. There's also a certain degree of skills that you need to actually successfully implement and execute on AI solutions. So that, yes, that starts at a young age, but you also have to enable, teachers and employers and others who are already in the marketplace with the right skills so that they know how to use the solutions that are being created. So there's a component of education in the ecosystem, there's a component of skill building, there's also a component of policy and legislation. So, AI solutions are proliferating rapidly. However, as is the case with so many different areas, policy is lacking. So if policy is lacking, and the regulatory guardrails don't exist, then the onus is upon the designer or the company or the student to really think about, what are the negative implications to society, what are the guardrails, etc. So there's an onus to build that into design, and there's also an onus upon those same individuals to then champion particular policies or to try and influence policies or to at least partner with those policymakers who are thinking about the implications of AI and tech. And, another piece of it is, outside of legislation, is this whole notion of capital and resources that I mentioned when I started the conversation. There are corporate resources, so human capital and how employees can support students and partner with youth and mentor youth, how, grants can be given from Microsoft and Salesforce to the youth to actually support them in developing solutions that reflect AI for good. There is also a component of how technology can be put into the hands of students, especially some of the most excluded populations, so that they don't get left behind as technology advances, as AI advances. So there's a component of sort of equity that needs to be considered as well, and resources need to be moved in such a way that we're building an equitable ecosystem around AI. So that's another piece of it. So, when I was thinking about it, it wasn't rooted so much in the AI for good programs and solutions as much as it was in how do we really together build an ecosystem working across governments, working across companies, and working across, community organizations that have very relevant programs. As I was thinking about the relationship of AI and social impact, a couple of different examples came to mind. So, if we continue on the path we are on today, the types of programs that we have in AI that are available through, let's say, big companies or universities or institutions aren't going to be equitably available or accessible to the masses. So that's why continuing to fund and support some of the alternative ways that people learn and really disrupting the education system is important for technology at large to be sort of equitably distributed and education around it to be equitably distributed, but also with respect to AI. So you have online learning platforms, you have an increasing number of people in developing countries who have banded together and formed coalitions and hackathons, etc., to support others in their community around AI. One example from my personal experience working at Microsoft and Salesforce is Teams for AI. So Teams for AI is a global program where they have local representatives who are actually teaching AI courses to their peers, to younger students. I have met so many incredible women in Pakistan in particular, just because I've experienced with the hackathons there, who are coming up with really amazing solutions to some of these really hard to solve problems using AI at a very young age, 16, 17. They're working on water, they're working on climate change, they're working on, all sorts of things. But in order for us to really be able to harness the value of what they're working on and creating, we really do need that ecosystem approach so that they have access to the resources to continue to support and scale up some of the things that they're coming up with. Another thing that, in more in the negative realm, that sort of came to mind is an over-reliance on, let's say, AI. So I know there's a large conversation around ethics and guardrails, and because the data in some cases, due to power structures, due to just historical biases due to the way resources are distributed in the world. Sometimes the data simply isn't there to inform an AI solution in a particular way. So the outcomes that you're getting are biased or lopsided. So there needs to be a very concerted effort to put resources into the data ecosystem to make it more equitable, and to also be cognizant of the fact that when you're creating these solutions, they may not really reflect the population as it stands today. So alongside, educating the youth, getting them excited about AI, I think an entire ecosystem needs to be built that's also accessible to youth. And the interesting thing is, just as we think about government institutions and democratization of government, and there's talk of increased youth voices in political forums, etc., I think there's an opportunity to also allow the youth and engage the youth in developing this ecosystem themselves. So actually bringing them to the table when policy is being discussed around AI, through parallel councils. The councils exist of experts, but youth are thinking about their future. They're thinking about climate change. They're thinking about what they want their future to look like. So involving them in the ethical discussions, involving them in the AI for good discussions, ensuring that the programs that are available and accessible to them actually reflect some of the values we want to see in society, to really create a values-driven ecosystem and education system for the youth. I think the onus is upon us to do that. So now I just wanted to get into some of the actual sort of programs that I have seen. At Microsoft, we have a number of different programs that are for various excluded populations or for girls and women. And the idea is, again, the idea is really interactive. So I know that Tara had mentioned that making it tangible is really important, or having experiential learning. So very similarly, Microsoft has tried to create venues for students and for girls to actually discover different ways to use AI, different forms of sort of technology to build engagement, and not just to teach sort of the quote hard skills. And I think that's really important to build your curiosity. I think project-based work is also important. So experiential learning, project-based work, examples that are actually rooted in real life experience and their day-to-day experience that match and resonate, whatever stage they're at in their learning or growth and development. So it really is about building that sort of curiosity, in a Reggio Emilia type of way, so that they're taking on projects in partnership with others, and they're collaborating on AI in a way that's applicable to their day-to-day lives, and that's applicable to the future that young people want to build together. So I think having it grounded in reality and having that sort of discovery element too is really important, and Microsoft has certainly worked that into their programmings. Another way that I've seen sort of tech companies support the AI space is mentorship. So really allowing their employees or encouraging their employees rather to mentor youth in AI, and to also give them sort of access to some of the knowledge that they have, and to almost co-create with them. I think that happens on a more organic or ad hoc basis. I would like to see sort of more structured, mentorship programs that actually take youth from, mentorship to design to actually go-to-market strategies. I haven't seen as many of those in-house in the places I've worked, but I am familiar with other organizations we partner with, such as the Knowledge Society and others that are running hackathons, where we're trying to, as a company, partner with them and allow them access to our employees, our know-how, etc. And they're really working on the individual and helping enable that individual and supporting them with the concept, etc. So I mentioned some of the programs, the hackathons, etc. I think one other area that tech companies have been focused on is just sort of the research. I mean, part of it is about the data piece that I spoke about, and part of it is just about trying to understand the implications of the various solutions that are created and really doing targeted research. And, I think although youth don't necessarily participate in that aspect of it, I think increasingly so, we do have to involve youth in shaping the agenda of what that research looks like. So there's more to be done there, but research is another area. And finally, there's this area of inclusive design and designing programs differently for accessibility, for basically deeper impact. And AI plays a role there as well, where our scientists are working with designers in partnership to really bring to life solutions that are high value and are addressing specific issues. So I think those are some of the main ways I've seen technology companies sort of play a role. I do think that there is a huge opportunity for tech companies to really play a greater role in building this ecosystem around the intersection of social good and AI. So education and awareness, I mentioned policy, I mentioned directing capital and assets to the highest value solutions. And I think one way to test those out, one way to actually do it is by giving back through youth programs or through youth-focused programs, especially if we think about the more excluded populations who've been historically underserved, and for whom the power structures just haven't worked. If companies are able to double down on those geographies and invest in their next generation and really equip their next generation with the educational tools as well as the technology and know-how, I think there's an opportunity to really close the equality gap rather than continue to exacerbate it as things stand today.
Yep. Thanks, Samira. And it's really, actually, I really like the terms ecosystem. Like today, if we want to inspire young people or support the young people and let them to explore more what is AI, how to make use of it. Actually, just like you guys share, like Tara's slide also mentioned about we have educator, the parents. Since there is actually in this ecosystem, we should have a lot of different stakeholders, different people to contribute and to involve the expert, like in terms of the resources, the skills. I think also like today's audience, we have different background people. We have investors, we have some professors from the universities. So I think we can have a discussion start from this angle is that, so can you guys share a bit on any example or any stories you see there's maybe two or three or a few parties come together and they are making something interesting, or they are creating some bigger impact for the young people or on the AI for good? Yeah, will you guys share?
I can go quickly, but yeah, I mean, I think Technovation only exists because of volunteers. We are a small organization. We have 25 people or so, but we create the curricula, which we make freely available online. But the only way we can reach thousands of people is through partners, right? And so the reason, I think one thing we have learned the hard way when you collaborate is you cannot always collaborate with anybody, right? Like, I think you really have to sort of sit down and think about what are your goals and where are the gaps that one person the other organization can fit in. And I think people think like in the nonprofit sector there isn't a competition, but there's always few resources, time, attention is scarce. And so if you, for any kind of good collaboration or an ecosystem, one framework that has been helpful but is actually quite difficult to do is the collective impact framework, where there is one backbone organization that does all the dirty work, really, right? Like the data collection, the organization of the meetings, the setting of the agenda, the really doing the back end work, and then all the others are coming in. And we've done these kinds of very, very complex partnerships in the past. And when it has been most effective is when you actually align your metrics of success together, and the way you think about how you're going to measure success actually has to fit. And this is very hard work because it means that my surveys have to align with somebody else's surveys. And if we are working with colleges, like our students need to match into their pipelines. So I think if you're really like, that is the Cadillac of collaboration, when you're really trying to be very intentional. And sometimes that may not be the right thing to do, right? Like, but I want to be careful about, not all collaboration is good. You have to really think about the goal. And another way that we have learned doesn't work is when your cultures don't mix. Um, 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 Ego, and like, if organization is very fast moving and young, or it may have a hard time working with a research organization, for example. So I think these are all things that people don't like to think about because it slows you down. And maybe it's okay. Maybe you go into the collaboration, it doesn't work out, and you move away. So I'm not saying that you should spend this time planning all of these things. So.
Yeah, so I agree with everything, Tara just said with regards to prioritization being an issue when you're bringing different stakeholders together from different sectors. Within the sort of organization, you have to choose which partners to work with, and that often is difficult to do without a clear framework or strategy. The notion of aligning outcomes and having that drive your work is also a challenge. So all of these things resonate, including the cultural piece. I would say the interesting example from my end is this pilot that we were trying to launch around net impact. So basically trying to understand the net impact of technology in the world. So there was a startup that had built a solution that takes industry outcomes and aligns industries to a net impact sort of profile. So they had looked at a lot of industry data and basically had mapped certain impacts that were prevalent in certain industries. However, they needed a larger tech partner to really kind of test out and refine their model. Because AI solutions are built on sort of data, you're also learning, right? So they wanted access to a really wide pool of data, and they also wanted our data scientists and researchers to kind of weigh in on the model. So when it was a really, really cool idea. I thought it was high impact and interesting because it kind of is a predictive net impact model. It's using existing data sets as opposed to asking organizations to collect their own data and then using that to measure impact. It's actually a way to predict. You enter in, characteristics of your organization, you enter in your industry, and then you kind of get a net impact score based on certain things that most companies tend to track. So I thought it was very interesting, but I faced exactly some of the same issues Tara mentioned because, this was a startup. They needed to move quickly. They wanted to test. They want to partner now. The company is like, oh, hold on. Is this the best solution, right? Is this the organization we should be piloting with? AI is a new space. The strategy isn't been robust around who to partner with, who not to partner with, what to prioritize. So they weren't really willing to kind of take a risk to work with this startup and to support them. And the only way we were really able to support them is through almost voluntarily I linked some of the data scientists and the researchers to the startup founder, and then they began to have conversations. But this is like, a year or two with things just moving at a slow sort of joint learning pace. So essentially, that's my example, but I think it goes back to ecosystem building, and it goes back to what Tara said is just organizations need to have a way to prioritize what they're focused on, who to partner with, and there's got to be a better way for cross-sector players to accelerate progress and test things more quickly.
Yeah, I really agree. The prioritize is really important, and also I think one more thing is how to be trust. Like when we want to engage different partners, different stakeholders in the ecosystem, I think it really takes time or we need to build trust between different stakeholders and get them involved. And in you guys sharing, it sounds like it is quite important or quite good for the young people to learn AI or explore what is it or how to make use of it. And so do you guys think that actually it is quite essential for the young people to learn AI or to learn some technology stuff? Because I think it is quite in recent year, quite a lot of people talk about, okay, coding skills is not just a skills, it is a language. Everyone should understand it. Even small kids, they need to know the logic, how to do coding, how to do some tech stuff. So do you guys agree or yeah, would you like to share your view?
I can go first this time. I definitely think that AI is absolutely critical, or will be absolutely critical for every student and every individual, because it'll be so integrated into all other aspects of our life, into how we're able to manage our own healthcare, into how, we enable ourselves or empower ourselves to make decisions. So just like financial inclusion and financial skills are a must, basic foundational math skills, obviously, and reading skills, literacy are a must. Likewise, just understanding AI and having some baseline understanding will be absolutely necessary. And it's linked to my belief that technology in the future is also going to be viewed as a human right. So if you don't have it, hopefully as society, we're going to move toward helping those who don't have it get access to it, and likewise with knowledge and tools around AI. So that's a belief. It's easier said than done. I have children myself. I am not teaching them anything about AI currently. It is not built into their education system. It is not built into a lot of schools' education systems as they stand. They partner with innovative, partners to actually deliver some of that curricula. But I think schools and the education system also need to transform and are behind the times in terms of equipping, students and adults of tomorrow with the right skills and understanding of technology and AI. So although I believe that that's the future, in practice, I am not preparing, my own children for that kind of a future yet. And I haven't seen it done very well in schools in the US, at least. There are certain, specialized schools that maybe focus on science and technology. They do a good job of it. So, and the argument I've heard as well, it's a balance, right? We will expose children to AI and technology at a certain age. We'll slowly build it into curricula. So I think it should be a gradual thing, but I still think more needs to be done. And one of the main reasons more isn't being done is I think there's a gap in teachers and their own knowledge of digital tools, digital technology, AI, and what's the difference between something being AI informed, or versus an actual AI driven solution that's AI built. And there's just so much, there's a lack of knowledge. So in order to actually be able to execute on a vision where we're enabling every student to think about AI integrated into their lives, we're enabling students to think about careers in terms of AI careers. Do I want to be an AI policymaker or AI designer, etc.? We need to better educate, or we need to transform the education systems, and we need to articulate the benefits of actually building AI and AI-related knowledge and thinking into curricula early. So that kind of summarizes how I think about it.
I think I would say the more important thing for young people in this day and age is to actually try to understand their own sense of purpose, because the kinds of problems that children, say, in 5 to 10 years are going to face are very different from what the education systems were built for. So even in Silicon Valley, wildfires are a very big issue. Lack of water is a very big issue. And so if you were to think about 10 years down the line, yes, these issues are going to become more important. Who's going to solve them? We have clearly failed at that. And so our young people will have to do that. And the current school systems are not preparing them to think about these complex real world problems. And so having taught AI curricula, having done some of this myself, I also see young people, novices, really struggling with the content. It's straight up boring. People don't talk about that. Cleaning up massive data sets, looking at numbers the whole time doesn't appeal to everybody. And why should you do that? And so But so I feel like that is the wrong question to be asking. I think the bigger question to be asking is, what are the skills young people need for the world that they are going to be in, right? That the world that we are handing them to. And that's why the World Economic Forum talks about problem solving is that number one skill. Technology use and development is number 4. And so I think that when you are able to identify your own purpose, most people struggle with that. Culture hands you, oh, you should get a good job, you should make a lot of money, you should have a bigger house than your neighbor, and you'll be all set. And that kind of mindset doesn't apply anymore, right? And so without that cultural framework, people get lost, right? Like, well, what do I work for? And so that's why the sense of purpose is key. Like, and there's a rethinking of our value systems, right? Where more money is not necessarily leading to more happiness. So I think that we have to help young people think about, like, what do they want to tackle? And that requires a sense of self-efficacy, that requires courage, that requires a sense of agency, that my work matters, my actions matter. And then after that, guess what? AI is a very powerful tool. But when you have that sense of purpose, you'll have the motivation to go through whatever boring content is needed to break through that wall. But if you just hand me that content, I don't have the motivation to do that. I think Churchill said something, I forget, like, was it Churchill, that you can actually introduce classics to children too early because they don't have the appreciation for that beautiful prose, right? Oh, that beautiful, what that art. And I think it's exactly that, right? Like, it's not about, like, how quickly can we stuff in the AI content into kids so that they're ready for the future. It's missing the point. And so I think the larger question is, like, at every age, can we be helping children understand, look around them, like, okay, what are some problems that speak to you? What are your values? Parents don't have these conversations with children. Like, what are our family's values? What are our community's values? And then let's try to see who can we help. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I really think finding their own purpose is super important. I think not just for the young people, even like as a working level, we have a full-time job, we work every day. Actually, sometimes we also forget about why we are doing these kind of things, why we are working here. So I think it is really important for the young people, and also that's why in MakerBay a lot of our work is quite project oriented. So we have some skill training, but I think I totally agree that, like, those skills is how to help you to achieve your goal. Like, you want to build a solution to help the elderly, but how? So the skill is something to support your vision, to support what you really want to do. So I think it is really interesting topic, and I think you guys can also share more about, so how's your journey? How you guys find your purpose in your career, or the work you guys are doing now?
Yeah, so I mean, before I go into that, I wanted to say I really loved what Tara said about, potential damage of introducing AI too early, and AI being a tool as opposed to an end in and of itself. The purpose bit is great as well, and then really understanding what problem are you trying to solve is critical, sort of, when you approach any AI sort of related projects. So just love that so much. As far as my journey, in short, I've been really focused on trying to reach and support some of the most excluded populations because of a lot of exposure I had at a young age to economic disparities. So, I am the child of immigrants. However, I went back to South Asia very often, and I just saw stark differences in how the wealthy or the upper middle class lived and how others lived. And it just struck me and sort of sat with me. And it is something that I noticed in the media, like when I would see campaigns around Christmas time or winter where there were fundraising campaigns for particular famines or war-torn environments, to send money XYZ to this place. So it's just always those images have been in my mind from a very, very young age. So volunteerism has always been very important to me, volunteering at soup kitchens in the US, volunteering in different outlets in South Asia, putting on sort of charity-related events. So given I'm so focused on those who don't have the same privilege and resources perhaps I grew up with, it weighs into the way I think about technology and about program design. So I'm constantly trying to think about how do we bring and lift those communities along, whether it's the effects of climate change or it's how do you empower them with social entrepreneurship as a means to build their livelihood and therefore strengthen the community and the community wealth and their environment. So it really cuts across different cause areas, but it's very much focused on these excluded populations. And I think there are certain levers one can pull to really, bring excluded populations along, and those do rest in equal access to education. They rest in sort of social entrepreneurship, I think, is a great channel to really build the livelihoods, especially of women who've been excluded from economies, and to really give them a way and a means to pursue their purpose as well as earn an income. So there's that piece of it as well. And then access to health is another one. So there's multiple sort of ways that we can address this problem of bringing everyone along by enabling these communities with technology, by thinking of resource deployment differently, and most of all, though, going back to the purpose thing, by changing the mindsets of leaders. So a lot of the large corporations, well-endowed corporations that I've had experience with are either US-based or Europe-based. If you look at their philanthropic strategies or the way in which they are sort of doing social innovation, it is very much focused on those markets as opposed to taking a whole world approach. However, as we know from the pandemic and as we know from just recent times, we are one world. So if something is going to happen in one part of the region and it's going to be damaging, we will feel those effects immediately in other parts of the world, and they will leave long-term there will be long-term consequences to the sustainability of us as humanity. So, this is all to say I had some formative experiences when I was young that really had me, focused on how to bring excluded populations along. Over time, I defined it in different ways. At some point it was more along the lines of socioeconomic class. When I was in graduate school, it was along the lines of women. I volunteered in Bangladesh for a year and worked with acid violence victims. They're women who've been attacked with acid and they're disfigured. Therefore, they are shut out of economic opportunity. Sometimes even their own families don't want to keep them in the house because of stigma. So I was working directly with them. So for a period of my life, it was very much about women. Now it's sort of back in the socioeconomic realm, but I've just kept that with me, and sort of whatever company I join, whatever project I'm working on, I'm trying to bring that lens to my work and build it into my day-to-day job. So that's where I'm coming from.
And I can share, yeah, I've been trained as an aerospace engineer, but I think what goals you have as a kid change when you sort of interact with the world. And I think that's a really, really important lesson that, I think as you interact with the world is changing, you need to change along with that. And I was in a PhD program for aerospace engineering, and I really wasn't feeling that was my path to making a big impact. And I did a very simple exercise that I do kind of regularly, where it was like, what are some big problems in the world? And of course, like what are some unique characteristics that I have that can help me tackle the problem? But then also, what does research show as being a very, very effective solution that people are not already doing? Or what are some barriers to that solution actually working? And I think when I was doing that exercise 16 years ago, it was that inequality, right? Like it is unfair that your life is dictated by where you're born. And in today's day and age, when you have access to so many opportunities, we can change that. And so looking at the research, and I'll share one slide because it's so powerful with this data that we have. So I don't know if people know this, but basic literacy for girls is one of the most powerful strategies that it's one of the most effective investments you can make. So number one, when you educate girls, for some countries, it can increase the GDP by almost like 35%. It builds like very, very strong communities financially. Number two, there's tons of research to show that when you educate girls, they are healthier and they raise healthier families. They're able to navigate like health shocks like the COVID pandemic much, much more effectively. Number three, when women are educated, their communities are able to recover from shocks much faster, especially from shocks from conflict and shocks like pandemics, wars, things like that. But the last one that I will mention that most people don't know is that it's one of the most effective strategies for reducing carbon dioxide emissions. So it's the list varies, but it's either sometimes it's depending on how you measure it, but it's either number 3 or it's number 5. And electric vehicles is actually number 27. So that's how effective it is to empower and educate girls. And if you think about giving girls not just basic literacy skills, but empowering them with technology and entrepreneurship, then you can immediately see that these numbers will grow and amplify even more. So if you were to think about like in your life on earth, like what is the most effective way you can spend your time, but that should align with your value systems, right? Like and your own personal lived experiences, because like these kinds of problems are very, very hard. So you need that motivation. So if it aligns, then girls' education and sort of empowerment of young women is one of the most effective things you can do on this earth, and not only for people, but for the planet too.
Yeah.
So that's why I started this organization.
Yeah, it's really great. I think it's really great advice and stories, and especially for those students or young people to think about, okay, actually what I really like to do or really want to contribute my time or my resources into it. So it is interesting, like both of you guys mentioned about like changes, pandemic. It seems nowadays it is something keep changing or keep affecting our daily life. No matter our work or even the learning experience, the learning environment is totally changed also. A lot of young people need to do like online learning, and since it is a challenge for them, because when we work with some underserved youth, they don't have a stable network, they don't have maybe equipment, they are not have suitable for it. So it sounds it is quite a challenging time for them, but at the same time, I think it is also an opportunity to open up more channels, more resources for them to learn something new or learn AI. So will you guys share a bit on, so what do you think, like in the post-pandemic or like maybe now still during pandemic, how it changed the learning environment, and for the young people, what they should be prepared for, or maybe as an educators or as we want to inspire them, so what we should prepare ourselves, like in terms of our mindset or the knowledge we need to have, or the perspective, the approach we do the training or do our program, there should be something different. So will you guys share a bit on your view?
I think you're muted, Samira.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I think the pandemic has certainly created an urgency around particular social issues, whether it be humanitarian crises or climate change. There's just a realization that our time on Earth is finite, collectively speaking, if we don't address some of these core challenges. And because the pandemic was such a unique situation that was shared across different countries, different communities, I think it has served the purpose of aligning different communities around this global realization and sense of urgency. So I think that is, really interesting and important, because I think what that does is it opens up more doors for creative thinking around how we can create platforms and incentives for young youth to really innovate around their purpose. Because I think what was happening, previously is that basically youth did not feel incentivized to pursue their passion. Maybe they thought, they couldn't make money, or it didn't fit with their family's expectations or values of them. It's certain professions are more well respected or considered reputable, and others less so, even though those professions may be solving a very critical challenge that humanity is facing and may have a great impact on others. So I think that conversation is shifting, and as families kind of shift their mindset and have more values-based discussions and allow their children more creativity, realizing how important these challenges are to solve, I think the sort of ecosystem around youth, in order to enable and empower them to pursue alternative career paths, to develop solutions in these areas, will be stronger. I also think that previous to the pandemic, and when, I guess we weren't experiencing the kind of market volatility and lack of resilience we've seen in recent years. Obviously, there have been events in the past, but it's just a sustained sort of situation where there are multiple crises coming together. VC, and really traditional VC, wasn't really thinking about impact. Traditional investors, some more so, but still not thinking about impact in the way in which they are now. There's a huge movement around trying to actually assess impact in terms of sustainable investing, which is more from the do no harm lens, but also in terms of impact investing, which is thinking of a positive side of impact. And I think even venture capital is trying to figure out how can they actually have greater impact. There have been so many sort of youth-led, well, not youth-led, but youth-founded startups that are excellent, but they're not necessarily excellent in sort of creativity, design, but they're not solving a pressing need or a social challenge. They are just maybe another, let's say, Uber or another type of a commerce platform, but they're not thinking about sort of the impact angles. So I think if VC also shift their mindset in terms of where they want to put their money, youth will feel more empowered. They'll feel the permission to really pursue their purpose, and they'll think harder on what challenge they want to solve when they want to become an entrepreneur. I think becoming an entrepreneur was a fad for a while, and it's still in fashion, it's in vogue, but I think it will be more it'll be more acceptable to do it from a purpose-driven mindset. And I really have seen the social entrepreneurship space grow tremendously, or the impact startup space grow tremendously. So it does go back to really the conversation that Tara has rooted us in with regards to purpose, and how do we empower youth from a capital side, from a culture side, to pursue their purpose and innovate around it.
I think, Samira, you bring up a good point, though, that I think in low-income communities, it's much harder, and we see this with girls across countries that, like, I think venture funding exists only in certain capitals, certain areas in the world, and talent and ideas and problems exist everywhere else, and it's actually quite hard to launch something without any kind of support. Like, so many of our girls don't even have a laptop. They use the laptop in their school maker space or their library, and so I can see that there's a very large range of goals, and so I think the approach we are taking is that entrepreneurship may not be for everyone immediately. You may need to get a job in a larger company, which is very powerful because it builds your skills, it gives you a paycheck, it also builds your network, it teaches you how to work with people, and these are critical skills, and give you a sense of the ecosystem, and then gives you some discipline, and then you may be ready emotionally, financially, and with your social network to actually launch a business. And you don't always have to do a startup. We always encourage, like, launch it, get users, get people to. And social impact is, if it's reaching a lot of people and it's helping them, it will pay for itself. One example of an amazing app from a team in Kenya, where this girl spends a lot of time collecting water and carrying very, very heavy loads of water through dangerous places every day. So she made an app, and she and her team made an app for people to sell water and for people to buy water, and for them to take a cut of it, right? Like, so of course, so many people are going to use it. And so I think those kinds of things where I think having a sense of what you want to do, what is the problem you want to solve, and to get started, I would say use the Technovation curriculum, because it aligns the technical basics all the way from, you don't need to know how to code, to all the way to the end where you actually launch your app on the App Store or your product in the market and build out a revenue, a business plan, your pitch video, your everything, right? So the information exists out there, but the hardest thing is knowing what do you want to tackle, and whether that's a real problem that a lot of people face. So I think that's where curricula can really help you think through that. We see some questions. I don't know,
Yeah.
Sharon, if you want to moderate the questions.
Yep.
Oh, cool.
We can, and questions from the audience. So how do we get our foot into the door with AI? And do you guys have any views?
I mean, I would just suggest taking some online courses or availing curricula, like as mentioned earlier, to just educate yourself. So take it upon yourself as a self-learning journey to, leverage the existing resources that are at least at the introductory level. Then if you actually want to get a job in AI, I don't necessarily sort of agree with the premise that it's only if you know someone with power or influence, and that's probably because I don't understand the full context around the question. I'm also living in California, right, where there's just a huge demand for technology skills. So it is more about having A, sort of foundational knowledge, B, having a portfolio as with, let's say, a writer or an artist, having sort of a portfolio of your work, sort of having to do potentially project-based work or work on the side, and developing that portfolio is pretty important. And then when an opportunity presents itself, you're ready to show your best self. So that's the guidance I would give. I will say there is this notion of certain jobs being filled pretty soon after they're posted, or someone being in mind for certain jobs, that creates an unequal playing field in some companies around highly coveted roles. And perhaps AI is one such area. And if that's the case, yes, indeed, if you know someone of power and influence, they can help position you for a role because they will know about a role that's not yet open. And for that piece, I would just say that building your social capital is really important. Leveraging your professors, people in your network to the extent you can, and joining any sort of groups that are focused on your population and helping you sort of get, let's say, tech skills. By your population, I mean, I've seen groups that are focused on women, Blacks in America, etc., that are allowing people access to training, to mentorship, and to relationships, because those entities often have relationships with others. So that's a little bit fragmented, but that's my response to the question.
I think I would echo the portfolio part, right? Like, I think when I started my nonprofit, I had come just from India. I knew nobody in the United States, but I do one thing very well, which is I read a lot of books and I read a lot of articles, and I just reached out to the authors. I reached out to the people who write the research papers, and you'll be surprised how open they are. But you have to always give them something back as well. And I think that is something to think about. You have to earn respect. You have to earn, you have to put in the hard work. So I think the portfolio to me would be the really important thing to build, where we all have plenty of time in the day. I think Nigerians have a saying that says 8 hours for sleeping, 8 hours for school or work, and 8 hours for working on your dreams. We have plenty of time, right? So build something. Whenever someone shows me what they have done, a prototype, an app, you can say, here are all the courses I've taken. This is what I've built with them, and this is why I would like your help. Most likely people will say yes to you. And I think, building your network, I've seen that just going and saying hello to someone is not building a network. I think you have to really put in the work. And I think that takes a little bit of time. And I remember when I was starting out, I had a lot of impatience. But this goes back to your purpose, right? Because if you have a bigger problem you're working on, you will have patience, because you're like, okay, this is where I'm headed, and this is how this piece will help me connect. So, and it's not always a straight line, but I would say the access to internet, to free content today is just unbelievable. And the good thing about COVID is that many more people are online. You can watch so many recordings of some of the best, like machine learning experts, AI experts. Reach out to them, show that you've done the work, that you've listened to. One trick I will tell you, like if I read a person's book or if I watch somebody's video, I use a phrase that is uniquely theirs, and I put that in the subject line, and people always respond, because they know you've done the work and you've really watched the entire 2-hour video, or you've read the entire book. And so that's how you build trust and respect. People respect hard work, and then they will support you.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more point, is that if you seems you can't get the opportunities, but actually you can create by yourself. So like as other speakers said, in nowadays you can super easy to connect with someone. Just add them through LinkedIn, connect with them, drop them a message. Sometimes this kind of actions or this kind of initiative sounds maybe okay, someone maybe reject me, but actually there is no cost. If they reply you, schedule a meet, ask what you want to learn more, what you want to connect with, then you create the opportunity by yourself. So we have another questions from the audience. So knowing what we know that we're proposed, so how do we raise more awareness among the investor community in how impact does not have to be separate from business or tech? So any views on these questions?
I'm going to borrow from Tara's purpose framework, not framework, but rooting the conversation purpose. I think if the investors themselves can get more in touch with their personal sort of purpose, what drives them, etc., as professionals, they will be more likely to understand this concept of taking into consideration impact. It has to come from the capital owners. I mean, I think I've heard, it has to come from leaders, basically. I've heard of funds that have been created where those who are managing the funds understand and care about impact. But the feedback I've gotten is that it really has to come from the top of anything, whether it's a fund or an organization or a company, etc. So really educating those leaders around impact is one piece of it. Secondarily, there is some academic work being done around how businesses that have stronger ESG practices or that have, social impact built into their DNA tend to fare better in terms of market turbulence and volatility, etc., and therefore they are better positioned to be sustainable businesses. So there is some academic research on that. I think leveraging that and just making that more known and transparent and exposing leaders to that would be helpful as well. And I think, someone has to be at the helm of leading a cultural movement around the way one thinks about outcomes in the organization. So I did mention it should start with the leaders, but it could be someone who's not at the top, who's kind of leading a movement, a cultural change movement within the organization to really ensure that it's not just business outcomes that are being considered.
I think this is a hard one, but I would agree with Samira that it would start with convincing the leader, and it has to come from the top. And so I think my question to you would be, do you care enough to take on that battle? Because we have tried to raise funds in Asia, and it's a different ecosystem with different challenges, right? Like there are different market needs there. And so I think it would need a different type of thought leader to drive that. And I think data is important, but honestly, we make decisions with our hearts. We do not make decisions based on data. Otherwise, we would not have had the climate problem that we're having now. And so I think it would be, do you care enough to sort of be that champion to drive it? And I know that lots of stereotypes play a big role here. Gender stereotypes play a role here, and so I think it depends upon the problem and whether you want to be the one who is going to drive that, right? But this is not a trivial answer or a question or a problem. So I think it goes back down to, do you want to make progress on this personally?
Yeah, I think it takes time to educate the community as well. So we have another questions. So I think we mentioned about the purpose, problems we want to solve, which is very important. So any other factors you guys think is important also?
Yeah, I think knowledge about yourself is important, because I think we read impressive stories, we watch inspiring documentaries and movies, and you have lots of role models around you. But I think each person is different, and you want to think about what is the cadence of success and approval that will motivate you on a long, hard journey. And if, for instance, and I think some of it depends upon your own sense of self-efficacy and your own confidence. And sometimes confidence is built over time. And for an entrepreneur, you need to have very strong sense of self, because you're going to hear rejections the whole time. And so I think some of it comes from the purpose, but it's also like, if you're trying to tackle a social problem is not the same as launching a tech product. A tech product is honestly way simpler because it's contained. But a social problem has so many different elements. And so success will be much harder. It'll be slower. And so you want to ask yourself, do I care about it enough? And maybe the answer is no. And if the answer is no, try out a little bit, learn more about yourself. When you get dejected, it'll be not easy to build a team. Maybe you do well working alone. Maybe you really get drained working alone. So these are the kinds of things that once you identify the problem, you want to learn about yourself, and then maybe go back and revisit that problem, because it may not be the one that sort of, and it's a journey that will help you understand more about the problem and about yourself together as you keep going deeper and deeper.
The only thing I would add, which has already been said before, is that just applicability of AI to one's day-to-day life. So if you know that there are certain challenges that you face that have been solved through AI solutions that will make your life better in the future, having exposure to those solutions, understanding those solutions, I think might get people motivated. I know for me, when I'm thinking of engaging with technology or a technology company, the first thing that gets me interested is, am I using that technology at all in my day-to-day life? And what impact does my sort of knowledge or lack of knowledge on that technology have on my day-to-day life as compared to others, etc.? And if I learned more about it, would it make it easier? And would it, help potentially solve a problem I'm trying to solve?
Yeah. So I think we have last questions. So any examples or stories you guys can share a bit? So how we can relate AI in business field? I think there is a lot of examples or startup is using AI.
I can quickly take that. So AI in the business field, I mean, there's a component of it that is around how the business operates itself. Its own efficiency, its own alignment, its own purpose, and is it rooted in its own purpose? And AI has a role to play internally in a business in helping them make better strategic decisions around purpose, business alignment, resources, etc. So there's that piece of the work. There's also a piece of work very much related around, impact measurement and reporting on certain outcomes. Externally, in terms of market, there is a huge market opportunity, I think, in certain areas, and a piece of it lies in AI solutions. So if you think about, the Sustainable Development Goals in and of themselves are not just challenges. They're also sort of business opportunities. There are profitable solutions that can be created that are good for the planet, that advance us as a society. And some of those enable and utilize AI. Either they are informed by AI, or they are built on AI, or they are then helping advance the AI ecosystem. So there's multiple layers, internal, external, and there's multiple layers basically of how AI can be related to the business field.
Mm.
I will skip that one.
Okay, but I think there is a lot of example you can see, but I think the point is why we should use AI, because I sometimes we like this trend or this works, but sometimes it's not. Is it really necessary, or how you can really solve the service gaps or serve the user's need is the more important questions. So I think time is running out, and thank you so much for Tara and Samira sharing. I think it's really great discussions and really insightful sharing. And as said, I believe in a digital world now, so it is really easy or really important you connect with different kind of people. So for the audience, if you guys still have any other questions or anything you want to ask more, I think just feel free to connect with us, no matter LinkedIn or our content. I think we are open to talk with you and solve your questions. So so last things, let me wrap up these sessions by sharing our video is we created using AI, and let you guys know more about our AI program. And because it is also why we do start to do more like this kind of webinar sharing session, and let more people to know about how we can inspire more young people and make use of AI for impact.
Speaking of artificial intelligence, you may think that it is too advanced for primary and secondary school students to learn. But why don't we give it a try and join the community workshops of the Jockey Club AI Community Innovation Program? Guess what? Learning AI can be easier than you think. The workshops have 3 different levels, which will introduce AI technologies and tools with a step-by-step approach, and learn how to integrate AI in solving real-life problems. Students aged between 8 to 18 and their parents are welcome to join. Afterward, you can also join a challenge day, to team up with others and create innovative solutions for improving the life quality for the needy by applying the knowledge learned. Tell you a little secret, my name is Zara, I'm an AI presenter. Want to know what AI could do besides presenting? Sign up for the workshops and challenge day now.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, our speakers again. And yeah, please keep in touch, and we can have, yeah, as that in the ecosystem, we should have more collaboration and work together. So have a nice day, and thank you everyone. And if
Thank
you guys,
everyone.
yeah, if you guys want to stay, and you can use the platform to network with each other and yeah, meet some new people. So thanks.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you. Yeah. Bye.